Chapter 22, The Other Side. After several weeks of practicing the gazing and dreaming techniques Zuleika had taught me, I felt a strange silence settle over me. I was no longer in a hurry, I had no appointments to keep, nowhere to go and no one to talk to. I seldom saw Carlos or Don Juan, and when our paths did cross, they usually avoided me. I could move freely on the ground floor of Zuleika's house and in the patios and garden, but I was not allowed upstairs or outside the compound. My food was brought to me by a servant, and I slept in a high platform for which I needed a stepladder to climb into. During the day, I worked on some sketches. Drawing, I realized, was really another form of gazing. It allowed me to spend hours in total silence without getting bored. At night, I practiced finding my hands in my dreams, moving about without shifting the scene, locating certain objects Zuleika had specified beforehand, and giving myself commands in my dreams that I would carry out with as much detail as possible. One evening, I was gazing at the ripples in the pond. It was twilight and the small patio was a mass of dense shadows. Everything was so still that I thought I could hear whispering on the other side of the house. I again sensed a person lurking in the darkness, but this time, the man abruptly came out of the shadows and stood before me. I recognized him as the master of intent, but before I could say anything he vanished in a flurry of ripples that began with his feet and undulated upward to encompass the top of his head. To my astonishment, he had actually vibrated himself into non-existence right before my eyes. He melted into the darkness as mysteriously as he had appeared. Before I could become too frightened, Zuleika came and sat beside me on the bench. "The master of intent just showed you how to merge with the darkness," she said. "Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Be one with the night. Become invisible as he is." I felt something inside me struggle, resist. I did not want to be invisible. I wanted to be recognized and noticed. I was tired of being overlooked. I wished other people would help me get rid of my moroseness and quandaries, not ignore me even more. The memory of my grammar school classmates teasing me, and my teachers criticizing me because I did not speak English, unsettled me. My classmates would say, "What's the matter, a cat got your tongue," and take turns pulling my pigtail. Then they left me to brood on a bench while they ran off to play jump rope or kickball. I vowed then that I would get the attention I felt I deserved and no longer would be a frightened nobody. My whole life's endeavor was a struggle to fulfill that ambition. Now Zuleika was telling me to become invisible and be a silent, unseen nobody again. "A stalker's training is in the art of being invisible," Zuleika whispered as if following the drift of my thoughts. "A stalker makes herself unobtrusive in all situations, and never calls attention to herself." "Never?" I said, remembering the fortune cookie I once had that said, "There is only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about." It was true. It was easier to be criticized or insulted than to be ignored, overlooked. I did not want to not exist. Some part of me fought desperately to survive, yet I was a lesser part that settled for criticism rather than oblivion. I would have liked for Carlos and Don Juan to have taken time to evaluate my progress or even lack of progress, but they always passed me in the corridors without saying a word. "Let go," Zuleika said. "Let go of everything. Just let go." "Why must I?" I said stubbornly. "So that the energy waves from eternity can tumble you into other realms. They can't reach you if you shield yourself with yourself. Only if you are invisible can the waves affect your energy body directly." Something in me still fought the idea of being invisible. "Let go of your crappy self," Zuleika snapped. I heard her say that over and over, and as she kept saying it, something in me began to give up. I started letting go, although of what I didn't know, but I kept letting go more and more until I became fluffy, like a giant pillow, and when that pillow dissolved, I became a tiny, lost somewhere in the black vastness, and then I lost awareness of being it, and I was nothing. "Cross over," a voice said. "Let the energy waves of the universe push you over to the other side, to the world where we are." I followed the voice and heard it talk of a parallel universe almost identical to ours that existed behind a barrier. That barrier was made up of our concerns, our ideas of reality, our energetic affiliation to everyday life, and, fundamentally, to ourselves. Then I heard the voice of Nelita repeating what she had told me seemingly long ago, how not even the body is ours to keep, that the essence of life is borrowed, not ours to cling to. The essence of life is fluid and our awareness must be also fluid to move with it, or it is forever scattered in the fragmentation of the world into which we were born, but that there is a way out, and that is to let go and be nothing. I opened my eyes, and saw that I was still sitting on the bench by the pond, but instead of Zuleika, Emilito was there staring at me. So were Carlos and Don Juan, Nelita, and other people milling about the patio. Food had been set out on a sideboard. I was in the midst of a party going full force. People were having a lively discussion. They were comparing descriptions of their travels, of the things they had seen in the twin universe, as they called it. There is a pope, but he isn't celibate, Carlos said. He has a fat and loud-mouthed wife. Ah, but does he live in Rome? Don Juan asked cryptically. He seemed to be more relaxed than usual, almost jovial. Carlos thought for a moment as if it were a trick question. I have seen the most exquisite grove of trees, Emilito interrupted. They are dark green and enormous. Excellent for tree climbing. I have talked to many people, they are healthy and vital, but totally closed-minded, Don Juan added. They are unable to imagine or speculate. All their behavior is ritualistic, compulsive, and governed by rules. Their language is fascinating, Carlos continued. The fundamental unit is not the phoneme based on sound, but a syntactical structural element. Their brains directly impinge on one another in the form of an agreed-upon structural framework governed by rules of syntax. I have seen a typewriter that writes with syllables, prefixes and suffices instead of letters. Each key is practically a word in itself, Don Juan said. That's something for Taisha to explore. I became very excited upon hearing about such a machine. I wanted to know more about it, but other people contributed their descriptions of discoveries they had made about that world. I learned that the people there had a periodic table of chemical elements, but instead of having the usual 52 elements, their world had 76 elements, and some of them were not the same as the ones in our world. There are some animals that are very strange, Don Vicente said, and very unusual plants I had never encountered before. Much of the knowledge for curing comes from this world. I had a moment of sudden inspiration. You're talking about the realm of the invisible people of the Monte, I said. You mean the Yaqui Indians are right? There really is such a world parallel to our own, and magical plants and animals really do exist? Don Juan nodded. The sad part is, however, that for the Yaqui Indians the realm of the invisible is now only a myth. They can catch glimpses of it, but they cannot enter it with the totality of themselves. So for them it must remain only a part of their mythology. Why is that? I asked. Their everyday world has become too real and all-encompassing for them, Don Juan explained. The door has been sealed shut by a barrier of human concern that they cannot penetrate. However, it was not always like this, but now the Western world has impinged on the Yaqui so powerfully that, for them, that door remains forever sealed. All they can do is to relate stories of that world and tell tales of magic and wonder from a bygone time. I looked around for Zuleika, but she was nowhere in sight. Then I noticed that my surroundings looked somehow different. Although we were in the same house, it was not the same. It looked more like the patio and house did after a long session of gazing at the stones and walls. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I realized the tiles were not exactly square, they were rhomboid, and there was an ever so slight tilt to the floor and walls. If I had my leveler and plumb line with me, I could have determined their distance from true for certain. As it was, they seemed to be shifting as they did after my sessions of gazing. The tiles were shiny and vibrated, causing their shapes to alter ever so slightly. The roof beams of the corridor were not parallel as they should have been, and then I noticed that the trees were different too. Larger, fuller, their foliage more dense, and, while I was at it, I noticed the people in the patio. They looked pristine, pure, empty as if they had form but no substance. Emilito stared at me the way Zuleika had done whenever I was totally preoccupied with something in order to gain my attention. Then I saw him wink at me and nod his head. Suddenly I knew what his secret was, the mysteries he had wanted to reveal to me when I had enough energy to comprehend it. Now I grasped it without him having to tell me. He was Zuleika's dreaming body. That was the reason why Zuleika wasn't there in the room. Emilito nodded silently, waiting for me to finish with my bubbling realizations. I knew also that if that was so, then I, too, was in my dreaming body, and so was everyone in the room, and that was why they seemed so sparkling. What's more, the house, the bench, the tables, the food that had been set out in the patio, all were part of another world. I had crossed over into the twin world without even realizing it, and that meant that the discoveries that everyone had been sharing were not about some inaccessible distant dream world, but about the very reality in which we were now inhabiting. The minute I realized this, Emilito said, "That's right, Taisha. I am the other side of Zuleika, and you are your dream body, the other side of yourself. You have used the energetic wave from the universe to cross over to the parallel world, the one that exists next to our own." I pinched myself to see if I was real, and seemed to be as solid as could be, given my state of excitation and ebullience upon realizing where I was. "We are in another braid of the universe," Emilito explained. "The one overlapping with the world of everyday life, made up of the same energy, only slightly different. Now you know what it means to become invisible, and what it is like to be stalking with the double, and why we always stress sobriety and control. Without control, awareness is dispersed. You can do without the self of everyday life, but you can't do without sobriety and clarity. Awareness must remain intact, no matter where you find yourself, so that you can continue to perceive." I embraced Emilito and thanked him for all his help. To my surprise, he seemed to be solid, and yet he wasn't, for we encompassed volumes of space, like two gigantic pillows embracing, but the reason I could grasp him was because I, too, was billowy and without substance. "But how is it possible that you are a man when Zuleika is a woman?" I asked. "My dream body is not that of a man." I touched myself quickly to see if what I was saying was true. "The Nawal Julian taught us how to move our assemblage points to the position of a man," Emilito explained. "It was an extraordinary challenge to be male, and I took it. It's so tiresome to have a hole between your legs," he added with an exaggerated sigh. "It leads to all sorts of outlandish behavior." Everyone laughed in agreement, especially the female members of the group. Then I saw Carlos signaling me to come over to him. I realized I had known him forever, and now I knew where it was that we had met. It was not in the anthropology department of the university, as I had first thought, but it was here in the twin world, which I had visited often. We had done many things on this side, things that were inconceivable from the point of view of the everyday world. Then I saw a young woman about my age. She was blonde, had blue eyes, and was petite and very pretty. Her name was Florinda, and she was the ward of the older woman, with the same name, who was Nelita's counterpart. "You and I are sisters," I said, embracing her affectionately, for I recognized her from other encounters, although I could not remember them in detail. "Remember each other well," Don Juan said, "because you'll meet again in the world of everyday life and will have forgotten that you knew each other. You will have to reconstruct this feeling of unbiased affection from scratch." The Nawal woman, Carol, whom I remembered seeing before, was there too. She was the young woman who had given Carlos the bread in the bakery in Hermosillo, but I already knew her. She had helped hoist me up into the treehouse and had looked after me while I was unconscious for 3 days and 2 nights. "And we also will meet again on the other side," she said, lisping a bit on the word side. "But we won't forget. We'll always remember that we loved each other, and she embraced me with such genuine affection that an overwhelming emotion enveloped me, and I knew we were tied to each other forever across universes. Don Juan stood the three of us around Carlos and moved our heads together so that they touched. He told us that his task was to make certain through all our training that our assemblage points would be in the same position, and even though our assemblage points would be constantly displaced throughout our training, they would move at the same rate and in the same direction, so that the four of us would function as a single unit and be able to amalgamate a consistent reality that we shared. For some time Carol will have to stay on this side with us, he went on. But you will not really be separated. The bond of energy set up in this world will hold across the boundaries between the twin universes. You only have to be silent and abandon yourself to know where each of the other is. I knew what he meant, but I also became frightened. From experience, it was evident that the universe was vast and one could easily get lost. I also was aware of my tendency to indulge in self-obsessions and in struggles for independence, which could only set up barriers and block the energy holding us together. The most dangerous part was that we would meet again in the world of human affairs, where our power would be minimal, diminished by the concerns of daily life and the absence of Don Juan and the energy of his sorcerer group. We would be operating on a low-level awareness, colored by the massive interference of the bulk of humanity with their own obsessions and concerns. Florinda will be your companion and act as your counterbalance, Don Juan said. She'll see to it that you don't indulge too much. If you do, she will be at your throat like a ferocious jaguar. Florinda let out a growl and clicked her teeth together repeatedly in a biting motion. Everyone laughed. Better watch out, or she'll be at your throat, Don Juan warned. And I will never be at your throat, Carol said soothingly. Listen to Florinda, she is more sober than you. The two of you will flank the Nuna wall and journey with him, perfecting yourselves until Carol Tiggs returns. When will she come back? I asked. Only power can decide that, Don Juan replied, and your impeccability. He paused for a moment. If you want to see your loved one again, be impeccable. Do your recapitulation and don't think about yourselves. Carol gave us a wistful smile, urging us on. I'm counting on you, Taisha, she whispered so no one could hear. You will pull me, and I will pull you. Agreed? I nodded but wordlessly asked, how? She showed me her left hand. She was wearing a gold and diamond ring that looked like a tiny monstrance. She told me to gaze at it for a moment and to remember it always, because one day, she would give it to me as a sign that we had been together before. In the world of everyday life, it is so easy to forget, she said. Tokens of proof are always welcome. I'll never forget, I swore, embracing her. I'll pull you with my affection. This afternoon you have enough energy to grasp the truth of the twin universe as a bona fide realm of existence, Don Juan said, but it's not that easy to cross over with your body. You can catch glimpses of it in dreams, but to come here with the totality of yourself takes years of training and storing energy, and even then, there are countless obstacles and no guarantees. Then I won't go back, I said. I'll stay here with all of you. That's not possible, he said sternly. You have to perfect yourself in the world of human beings. You have to begin from that point and journey here. Why? Because that is where the bulk of your energy is rooted. Besides, there is no advantage of being on this side. A stalker must be fluid so that you can move anywhere. You must be at ease and impeccable no matter where you are, in this world, or in the one in which you live, or in any other place in the infinite band of possibilities that makes us sentient beings. Leave the self behind, and you can go anywhere, Carol said. Your task is to dissolve everything that makes a human being grounded in the world of human beings. Then, I'll leave everything here, I said. Don Juan smiled. He advised me that while we were in the everyday world, all the energy gleaned from recapitulating and impeccable actions would be able to cross over to be stored here with them. Carol would remain to act as a beacon and to help consolidate our double. The more impeccable we were and the less emphasis we placed on our personal selves, the more we would strengthen our other side, or energy body. You will be like squirrels gathering nuts for the winter, Carol said. Your energetic selves will get stronger and more concise, until one day you will be able to tip the scales and find the entirety of your being on this side with nothing left for the world of the human apes. That day, she said, we would become invisible to the human eye and we would consolidate the totality of ourselves on the other side. It was all crystal clear. I knew now the importance of the sorcerer's training. The recapitulation was to rid oneself of one's remembered past and to release one's trapped energy. Losing self-importance prevented one from placing undue energy on the fabricated social self, thereby making it into a permanent feature. The sorcery passes enable one to dissolve the solidity of one's body and purify it energetically. Losing personal history frees one from the compulsion of relating oneself to a single mode of being, and prevents us from being pinned down by others with their thoughts and expectations. To test one's progress and transformation, sorcerers use petty tyrants they find in their daily world. In this way, they make certain that change isn't merely an ideal but an actual bodily metamorphosis on a fundamental energetic level. By regarding the world as controlled folly, a stalker is assured of not becoming entangled with human concerns. Only in this way can one liberate enough energy and become fluid to move with one's body into the twin world. Quieting the internal dialogue through the gazing techniques has a triple purpose. First, it blocks the reinforcement and affirmations we constantly give ourselves that the world is such and such. Second, it enables us to store the energy needed to make the crossing. Third and finally, it creates an opening in our energetic bodies so that the waves from the universe can tumble us over to the other side. I thought of what Zuleika had said about letting go and becoming invisible. Now I knew why everything that is human had to be abandoned. Sorcerers utilize the same methods as do the phenomenologists, such as suspending judgment, questioning the taken-for-granted aspects of space and time, but sorcerers do not merely describe phenomena but are able to actually transcend reality. Reality is constituted by the existence and condition of our sense apparatus that enable us to perceive the world. Sorcerers, by deliberately and consistently enhancing that capacity for perception through storing energy, liberate themselves from the imprisonment of a single mode of being. Sorcery is really the capacity to perceive more than the average person. Taisha is philosophizing even in the twin world, Emilito said out loud. Let her conceptualize and speculate all she wants, Don Juan said. Someday she will be able to live her realizations. Besides, it means she and Carlos will get along famously. We all know how he is given to analysis and conceptual interpretations. Like the Nawal Elias before us, Emilito said. Don Juan nodded. Well, then let Taisha speculate on this, Emilito said. The here and there of the treehouse. I turned to face him. His eyes were glowing with the excitement of a revelation. With a nodding of his head, he coaxed me to think about it. I was at a loss as to what he was referring to. Living in the treehouse gave you a different perspective on here and there, he said. I don't know what you mean. There was no horizon in your world, he said, bringing his face so close to mine that his features became blurred. It dawned on me then that half of Clara's house, the grounds at the front part of her place, including the giant trees and the treehouse, had all existed in the twin world. I had already spent many months of my training on this side. No wonder Emilito had insisted that I recapitulate again, saying I had to do it several times for there were many layers of existence to break through. I had to do it once with my everyday body and again with the double. What's more, Emilito was right, my extended stay in the treehouse and the trees had altered the relationship between my body and the ground. My assemblage point, or center for organizing perception, had been displaced to another point on my energetic body, thereby enabling me to experience different spatial and temporal relationships. Now that I focused my attention on it, I remembered that the foliage of many of the trees was so thick that the sky as well as the horizon were completely obscured. Perception of the world in the trees was not laid out in terms of distant and close space. Rather, everything was immediate, intimately related to my body. It was a superb training to expand the limits of my awareness of space. The more I climbed the trees, the more fluid my assemblage point became, until I could swing from branch to branch feeling no separation between myself and my surroundings. It gave me a new perspective on the world, totally different from the one I had while I was on the ground. In order to climb the trees, I had to match my physicality with that of the branches and leaves. My entire existence was determined by the here and now. For any distraction could have caused a loss of balance and a fall to my death. At any given moment, all of me was focused on a specific concern, that of maneuvering through the branches. Past, future, and the far away had all merged into a single point, the immediate now, which was governed by my particular task at hand. I had dissolved my old mode of being in the world through my first recapitulation in the cave, and I had incorporated a new one, that of a tree dweller, by never leaving the trees. I experienced a new bodily solidity that at times would express itself in an intense feeling of claustrophobia. I could dispel this by either merging with the trees energetically, or by creating a new experience of space or time, in which case my body had to dissolve the branches around me and move beyond them. I did this through a second recapitulation, which expanded my temporal horizon, and through practicing the bodily movements Emilito would periodically show me from the ground, which expanded my spatial horizon. You recapitulated in the trees, practiced dreaming and intending in the trees, and even were able to do movements outside the trees, leaping with your energetic body into a different realm, Emilito reminded me. All this is stalking with the double. It was made possible by abandoning the memory of the limits of the physical self. You moved from the trees to another reality, Don Juan said. A realm which is inaccessible from the world of everyday life. You used intending to catapult you from one braid of the universe to another. Now you know what we mean when we say that intending is the wings that carry a sorcerer across the span of eternity. Soon my party will be leaving on those wings, but we will meet again, somewhere in the folds of dreaming, and from there catapult ourselves to freedom. I wanted to ask him when and where they would be going, and more specifically how we would catapult ourselves to freedom, but my dreaming energy was waning. I knew I would be waking up soon in the world of everyday life, and there, I would forget most of what had transpired here. It would be like a vivid dream, fragmented for a short while, then it would fade and merge with the dense fog that separated the twin universes. I have to go now, I said. I don't suppose you could keep me here with you? No, Don Juan said firmly. If you come, it will have to be on the wings of intent, blown by your own fluidity. I thought of Nelita's advice of always saying goodbye to each moment because it would never again return. She caught the drift of my thoughts. Impeccability is saying hello, thank you and goodbye all in one moment through your superb actions, she said as she embraced me. That way you will always be at ease, with no regrets, and with nothing pending. I nodded. It summed up everything I felt in a nutshell, so that nothing more needed to be said. I looked at everyone, trying to incorporate them in my gazing memory before they faded into the fog. I woke up, gradually becoming solid again. I was lying in my bed in Zuleika's house, numb and disoriented, and then I remembered bits and pieces of a giant mosaic. I knew that another world existed, a world that was as real as the one I had learned to call my own. I knew that I was nothing. That whatever I thought I was is a fabrication, a temporary consolidation of components held together by a force for some effect, but it could never be taken for real. There was another reality, parallel to our own, and it too wasn't real. The position of our assemblage points was everything. It amalgamated worlds upon worlds and enabled us to experience them as our world, as the world. The world of everyday life was only one perceptual possibility out of an infinite number of possibilities that make up existence. The stalker's training is to be fluid, invisible without attachment to self and things, so that one could shift back and forth at ease without losing energy or getting lost. Living in the world of everyday life was like being a student in a class. I had to give a good presentation, I had to appear that I knew what I was talking about, that I meant what I said. I needed to strive for order and coherence, but when the class was over, whatever was said meant nothing. It was only an orderly structure created for that moment and not meant to ever be taken seriously as something real or believable. It was an exercise which had to be discarded when the need was over so that one could move on in a never-ending journey. So it was with the twin reality. It was made up of people and animals and vegetation just like our world, only different. The grove of trees in Clara's house, the tree house, Emilito and myself all had been part of the twin world. I realized I had spent entire stretches of time there without even knowing it. I had been able to enter it under the power of Don Juan and his group of sorcerers who trained me. He and his group of sorcerers, through a lifetime of training, stored enough energy to cross back and forth without losing their awareness, their control, and sobriety. With training I, too, would be able to make the great crossing and have enough energy not only to perceive the twin world but to hold that position of the assemblage point long enough to remember it in detail, and with added energy to be able to describe the place and the path so that the listener on this side would be able to comprehend them and perhaps even to make that journey himself. Carlos came into the room where I had awoken. He examined my eyes to see if I was myself again and nodded satisfied. He told me to go get my things together, for we were returning to Los Angeles. A new academic year would be starting soon, and it would not be auspicious to miss the first day of classes.